poor husband. Suddenly, your husband is diagnosed, and you think, goodness, that was quite difficult. I almost said something, but I felt that it wasn't the time to say. I was just longing to let it out, but obviously I couldn't. Look at my husband.
Exactly.
Nothing stopped him. He just said, this is my way, I'm going to cope with it.
The most emotional interview ever given.
A new royal memoir is reopening an old question. Did years of therapy change the way Prince Harry remembers his own childhood? West End star Ruthie Henshall's new book paints King Charles as a warm, hands-on father who once chased young William and Harry through the corridors of Balmoral while they squealed with laughter. It's a picture that stands in stark contrast to the emotionally distant father Harry, described in his 2023 memoir, Spare. Royal commentators are now weighing in on whether therapy reshaped Harry's memory, or whether Henshall simply caught Charles on his better days. The gap between the two accounts has become one of the more talked-about royal storylines of the summer, raising questions about memory, grief, and how family history gets rewritten over time. A royal procession that had followed the same 200-yard path through Windsor every June for 6 centuries came to a full halt on live television. The reason traced back 12 days, one handwritten page, and a decision made in secret the night before the ceremony. Understanding why that line stopped requires going back to what happened inside a closed rehearsal hall nearly 2 weeks earlier, and knowing who was standing behind the monitors when it did.
My poor husband. Suddenly, your husband is diagnosed, and you think, goodness, that was quite difficult. I almost said something, but I felt that it wasn't the time to say. I was just longing to let it out, but obviously I couldn't. Look at my husband.
Exactly.
Nothing stopped him. He just said, this is my way, I'm going to cope with it.
The most emotional interview ever given.
St. George's Hall, Windsor. A rehearsal with no press, no public audience, and no cameras pointed at faces, only technical units aimed at the floor markings. The yellow light was low. Family members stood on tape marks while a man with a clipboard counted paces out loud. The atmosphere shifted when Camilla entered. She bypassed her mark entirely and walked straight to the technical area, where the broadcast team sat behind a row of screens. What those screens were showing was Catherine, Princess of Wales.
We can now, thanks to Camilla, nail down what happened next. The King was admitted on January the 26th for his routine nothing to worry about procedure and was told he had cancer. He was diagnosed on January the 29th. On January the 31st, his newly informed wife was dispatched to open a cancer centre. On February the 5th, less than a week later, the palace hurriedly released its bombshell announcement that he had cancer, having been bounced into it by himself. Having invited the world to follow his prostate treatment, he faced insatiable interest in his recovery. Keeping the worrying new development private would have required.
Every rehearsal run, the cameras tracked the same subjects, the same people the live broadcast would follow on the day, so Catherine appeared on 3 monitors at once, the slight turn of her head, the small half-smile aimed at someone just out of frame, the 2-finger adjustment of her ceremonial hat without once looking at her hand, the kind of movement that belongs to someone who has done something 400 times and no longer thinks about doing it, nothing performed. Nothing staged. That was precisely the problem. Everyone in that hall understood it was the problem.
I remember coming to see our Maggie's just after the King being diagnosed. Nobody could say anything at the time. That was quite difficult. I almost said something, but I felt that it wasn't the time to say. Looked at everybody who was suffering and all the relations, and I think it made me realised even more how important these places were.
And it was just a week before it became public, and the courage.
Camilla stood behind those screens and watched her daughter-in-law be, without effort, the most compelling person in the building. She ran the same calculation she had been running quietly for 2 decades. No title changes it. No robe changes it. No amount of positioning beside the king closes the gap between a woman the country has watched grow up and a woman it is still deciding how to feel about. When both are in frame, the audience's attention goes to the younger one. It always has. Envy is a feeling. What came next was a choice.
Further believes that Camilla's interview, while being emotional and deeply personal, has also exposed a major issue in the way that the British monarchy decided to manage the announcement of the cancer diagnosis. Indeed, he has written this afternoon that it confirms how badly the palace botched going public. And here's his argument.
Around 30 people were in that hall: camera operators, a floor manager, 2 men from the Lord Chamberlain's office, a woman marking positions on the boards with white tape. None of them were there to observe a family. They were there to produce a broadcast, and they had been doing it long enough to understand that the only safe move in that room was to look at their own work. Camilla turned to her assistant, who stood nearby with the script folder tucked under his arm, and pointed at the monitor showing the movement plan.
I've been told that literally Charles's doctors are cock-a-hoop with how the treatment is going, and are running it up and down the flagpole to other patients coming into the London clinic, which is this incredibly exclusive clinic in Harley Street where he's being treated. But I feel like everybody's grasping for reasons as to why because like we are a million miles now from what people actually want, which is for Harry and Meghan to have their titles removed.
Indeed we are. And Tom Sykes further believes
A procession chart maps who walks where and beside whom. It also determines which bodies the fixed camera positions can physically capture on the day. Move someone 4 feet sideways on that page and they remain at the ceremony, still in the robes, still listed on the programme, and completely invisible to the broadcast. That is the entire mechanism. Everyone working at that level of event production understands it. Camilla's instruction was that the Wales section of the procession be divided into 2 separate parts. Catherine would be placed well behind the tall stone pillars, outside every primary camera angle in the building.
executive power and influence began flowing William's way. Within days, William had appointed a new private secretary, Ian Patrick, an experienced former diplomat, with the clear implication being that the heir would be stepping up to a bigger, more global role. His plans were brutally knocked aside by his own wife's subsequent cancer diagnosis, but he emerged at the end of 2024 with a far higher profile than his father and renewed authority within the palaces. Harry flew over the day after the announcement, much to the disgust of Camilla, who openly told friends she blames the unbelievable stress.
The reasoning behind the instruction was not complicated, and she did not attempt to dress it up. Reduce the on-screen presence of the Wales couple, take the centre of the frame for herself and the king. Quiet a public that had been visibly shifting its attention toward the next generation more and more with every passing year since the coronation. Control where people stand on that carpet, and the country believes it is watching something different than what is actually there. It was a straightforward plan. And this is where she made her mistake, the same mistake she had been making for 25 years.
Camilla, who openly told friends she blames the unbelievable stress induced by his memoir for contributing to her husband's illness. William tells friends something similar about Catherine's cancer. I have reported that as well. Harry came partly to remind the public that he was the king's son, and partly because he believed that by showing up he would get an accurate handle on his father's prognosis, so important for his and Meghan's next steps. He was stunned to be told absolutely nothing in a brief 30-minute meeting at Clarence House. Charles and Camilla left for Sandringham by helicopter immediately after.
She underestimated her stepson. William was standing at his mark at the front of the lineup. He heard it. What he carries when he hears a sentence like that is not simply about a camera position. He was 15 years old when he learned what that family does to a woman it has decided is occupying the wrong space. He watched his mother's diary shrink. He watched her staff rearranged around her. He watched the arrangements shift while she was still in the building. By the time it was finished, Diana was being managed rather than looked after, and everyone involved had been impeccably polite about the entire thing.
The number of male users of Maggie's has gone up. We had a 12% increase of men coming in.
If you literally take the cork out of the bottle and talk about it.
And there is no doubt that Queen Camilla cares deeply about this project. You can hear the emotion in her voice.
There was a woman who you met just sort of hovering. You invited her in and you immediately said to her, "You'll be looked after here. This is the place that you need to be." And that's been your magic.
What I look back over the 30 years is just how
lucky.
He walked off his mark and crossed the hall to the technical area. Every crew member in the room stopped what they were doing. He did not lead with a title. He did not soften anything. He raised one finger and pointed it directly at his stepmother's face in front of 11 members of staff. His voice came out flat and low, and it carried the full length of St. George's Hall. His wife stands beside him. Nobody puts her in the shadows. 11 people heard it. 2 of them will carry it for the rest of their working lives.
This was an interview produced by Buckingham Palace itself and published, Paula, guess where? Our home, YouTube. Power is changing. And to me, it was still significant, and I still call it an interview. But in some ways, you could argue this was Camilla taking hold of the emotional narrative surrounding the king's cancer in her own way, without relying on the royal rota, without relying on a mainstream media figure. So it was quite historic in a whole number of ways.
Oh, yes. Well, I think they've also had to.
Camilla said nothing in response. Her mouth tightened enough that it disturbed the lipstick at one corner. Her hand closed around the sash of her gown until the knuckles went pale. The 2 of them held each other's gaze for about 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the pretense that this was a family with a difficult past but reasonable manners collapsed entirely. She turned and walked out of the hall without a word. That silence was the thing that should have alarmed everyone around her. Camilla does not lose arguments at volume. She loses them quietly, and then she goes away and works.
Princess Diana's brother off the British newspaper front pages, apart from the Daily Mail, which actually ran with these revelations rather than Queen Camilla's announcement. The Daily Mail actually broke this story initially, and I believe want this serialization badly. They want the book. They want the Diana book, and they have previously serialized Earl Spencer's book. But look, Paula, there are huge repercussions about what Earl Spencer is doing. Tom Bower has just appeared on GB News and said what we...
The morning of the ceremony, Windsor carried the particular stillness of a place where 600 people are working very hard to make no noise. Guards checking equipment in the quadrangle, florists moving trays through a side entrance. The large doors that would soon open for international guests still shut, with 2 men polishing the handles. Deep inside the private apartments, Camilla had already concluded she was not going to accept the outcome of the rehearsal. She had spent 12 days in silence without one further word to her stepson about it. Everyone around her had read that as acceptance. It was not acceptance, it was preparation.
By the way, also pointing out that this does come at a perilous time for the monarchy.
Yeah, I mean, the monarchy is suffering. I mean, not only Andrew, but also Harry and Meghan. They've caused huge damage to the monarchy. And it is, I mean, the king doesn't have the same appeal as the late Queen did, unfortunately, although he's done a very good job. But nevertheless, it is a problem, especially amongst young people, because they're a very old monarchy, a very old monarch. The young don't actually form a relationship.
She understood exactly how the day would unfold under the approved arrangement. Catherine in frame, the Wales couple walking together, holding the centre of every wide shot, the way the public had come to expect since the coronation. Herself beside the king, half a step behind him, in photographs that morning papers would crop the following day. She reached a decision that a woman in her position should never have allowed herself anywhere near. She called her executive assistant to her dressing room and locked the door behind him. Heavy oak, an old key, no passing staff.
Of course, all of this comes at a time, Paula, and again, there are a lot of people who don't really like hearing about this, but I just report the truth. I'm going to go there, and there are a lot of other people now reporting the truth about this. Relations between Prince William and the King at a low ebb. This after the revelation that not only did he, extend this olive branch to Prince Harry, but he's also now inviting Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to Balmoral. So I want to get your view on this, and we're going to go in depth, actually, over on my Substack. You can come and join us there now at www.outspoken.live.
On the dressing table, among the makeup and the laid-out pieces for the day, she placed a small sheet of parchment she had drawn herself the previous night by hand. It showed the procession order with one alteration. A gap opened between Prince William and Princess Catherine, wide enough for one person, and an arrow drawn into that gap in ink that had not been entirely steady when it went down on the paper. That was the full plan. One page, one gap, one arrow. What that page was designed to accomplish was not a spacing adjustment. Walk into the space between a husband and wife during a live broadcast in a robe, the width of a doorway, and the wife disappears from the shot. She is not removed from the ceremony, she is removed from the record of it. Every photograph published the following morning shows 3 people where 4 should be standing, and the 4th is a hand and a sleeve at the edge of the frame. The assistant looked at that sheet and started sweating. He understood what he was holding. Changing an official order after it has been signed off, without approval from the household that owns the ceremony, is not a clerical matter. It is the kind of action that ends a career inside an afternoon and follows a person out of that building permanently. He tried to locate a way to refuse. She did not allow him to reach it. She moved around the table and stood closer to him than anyone in that house stands to a member of staff. Then she used the 2 things that always work, his position and the things he knew about her household that he would never be able to explain satisfactorily to a future employer. Her instruction was one sentence. Before the procession leaves, place this in the Lord Great Chamberlain's folder. He rolled the sheet, tucked it inside his coat, and walked out with a face the colour of paper. He crossed the castle to the ceremonial operations room, where the official folders sit until they are handed to the men running the day. There is a table, a leather binder with a metal clip, a guard on the door, and a moment every hour when that guard is replaced and the doorway belongs to no one for approximately 40 seconds. He waited for the changeover. He went to the table. His hand was shaking enough that it took 2 attempts on the clip. He removed the legitimate chart and replaced it with her handwriting. The clip snapped shut. 40 seconds, and the running order of a 600-year-old ceremony had been altered by a frightened man in a corridor on behalf of a woman who was at that moment 200 yards away, looking at herself in a mirror and straightening an earring. She was satisfied. Everything established about that morning points to the same conclusion. She was genuinely confident. She believed the folder was clean. She believed the coordinators would work from her page, and she had no idea she had been recorded doing any of it. Because the thing about William that Camilla has never fully absorbed is the same thing his uncle failed to understand about him. He does not react. He prepares. He had watched her walk out of St. George's Hall 12 days earlier without a word, and drawn the same conclusion. A silent Camilla is a working Camilla. The night before the ceremony, he arranged for a camera to be placed in the operations room, not a tripod-mounted unit with a visible indicator light. A small device concealed inside an antique bronze on a side table that had been in that room since the reign of his great-grandmother, recording continuously, feeding to a tablet that stayed in his hands. No one on the technical staff was told why. 2 people installed it and were asked to forget about it. When the assistant entered that room with the rolled sheet inside his coat, William was sitting in his study with a tablet on his knee, watching it happen in real time. He saw the man check the door. He saw him open the binder. He saw him remove one page and insert another. And when the swapped sheet lay flat on the table for a second and a half before the folder closed, the camera caught the handwriting on it. He saved the file twice. Then he went to the room where his wife was getting ready, put his arms around her, and told her that whatever happened out there that day, she should hold her position exactly where she was meant to be, and let him handle the rest. He went to his father with about 90 minutes remaining. Charles was in his private rooms with a valet managing the fall of the garter robe across his shoulders, a task requiring 2 people and considerable patience, one he has done enough times to hold a conversation through it. William did not knock properly. He did not open with anything polite. He crossed the room, placed the tablet on his father's desk hard enough to make the pen jump, and pressed play. The king stood in half a robe and watched a man he half recognized open a leather binder in his own operations room and replace a page.